She walked into his penthouse with a broken heel, a bruised ego, and absolutely zero plan. He looked at her like she was a bug on his $300,000 marble floor. She looked back at him like he was mildly inconvenient. Nobody in Seoul had ever looked at Shin Hyun-woo like that, not even his enemies, especially not his enemies. And that, ladies, is exactly where this story begins. Michelle Carter did not come to Seoul to fall in love. She came to Seoul because her cousin Diane had a big mouth, a bigger personality, and absolutely no concept of personal boundaries. It was Diane who had signed Michelle up for the Global Hospitality Exchange Program without telling her. It was Diane who had packed Michelle's suitcase, booked her flight, and handed her a boarding pass with the words, "You need this. You've been sad for 2 years. Go." And it was Diane who had then blocked Michelle on every platform so she couldn't argue about it. Michelle stood in Incheon International Airport with 2 suitcases, a hooded trench coat, and the particular expression of a woman who had been betrayed by someone she loved. Which was funny, because betrayal was exactly why she was here. 2 years ago, her ex-fiancé Marcus had cleaned out their joint savings account, used the money to fund a trip to Cancun with her best friend Jasmine, and then had the audacity to text her from the beach. The text said, and Michelle would never forget this for as long as she lived, it said, "I think we both knew this wasn't working. Also, Jasmine says hi." Jasmine said hi. Michelle had stood in their apartment, phone in hand, wearing the engagement ring he'd bought with what she now knew was partly her own money, and she had made a decision. She was done. Done with Marcus, done with Jasmine, done with love in general, done with the entire concept of trusting another human being with her heart. So when Diane had ambushed her with this exchange program thing, Michelle's first instinct was to say no. Her second instinct was also to say no. But her third instinct, the tired one, the one that had been eating cereal for dinner alone for 6 months and watching sad movies on repeat, that instinct had whispered, "Girl, just go." And so, Seoul. The program had placed her as a hospitality coordinator at a luxury hotel group called the Shin Imperial Collection. 5-star properties, 15 floors of marble and money, and people who thought suffering in silence was a personality trait. Michelle had worked in hospitality long enough to know how to smile at rich people. She was good at it. She was professional, efficient, and had a gift for making difficult guests feel seen and cared for. What the program description had failed to mention, and Michelle would be writing a very detailed complaint email about this later, was that the Shin Imperial Collection was not run by a hotel manager. It was run by Shin Hyun-woo. And Shin Hyun-woo was not, technically speaking, just a hotelier. She found this out on her 3rd day. Her first day had been orientation. Her second day had been training. Her 3rd day, a Monday, she had arrived early, pressed her uniform, and gone to deliver a revised event schedule to the executive floor. The elevator opened. She walked down the corridor. She knocked on the door of the head office. A voice said, "Come in." She opened the door. The man behind the desk did not look up. He was reading something, a document of some kind, and he had one hand flat on the desk and one hand loosening his tie in the absent, distracted way of someone who had forgotten the rest of the world existed. He was wearing a dark suit that cost more than Michelle's car back home. His jaw was sharp enough to cut glass. His hair was pushed back from his face in a way that was somehow both careless and precise. There was a long, thin scar that ran from just below his left eye down to the edge of his jaw, and it was old, healed silver, and it did not make him look scary. It made him look like a story. Michelle had been in hospitality for 7 years. She had served royalty, politicians, tech billionaires, and once, memorably, a man who had checked in with 3 tigers in a private enclosure he'd had installed on the rooftop. She did not rattle easily. She rattled. Just slightly. Just for half a second. Then she pulled her clipboard to her chest and said, in her most professional voice, "Good morning. I have the revised itinerary for the Hongkong event suite. I was told to deliver it directly to the executive office." He looked up then. His eyes were very dark and very still, the way deep water is still, the way you can't tell how far down it goes until something pulls you under. He looked at her the way she'd described, like a bug on his floor, like she was a mildly interesting problem he didn't have time for. "You're new," he said. His English was precise, accented, deliberate. "Yes, Michelle Carter, hospitality coordinator. 3 days in." "You knocked twice." She blinked. "Yes." "Everyone else knocks once. They're afraid to seem demanding." "I wasn't sure you heard me the first time." Something shifted in his face. It wasn't a smile. It was the ghost of the consideration of the possibility of a smile, existing briefly and then disappearing, like a rumor. He held out his hand for the document. She gave it to him. He looked at it for 4 seconds, set it down, and said, "There's an error on page 3. Michelle took the document back, looked at page 3. He was right. There was a small but meaningful error in the catering timeline. "I'll have it corrected and back to you within the hour," she said. 20 minutes, he said, and looked back at his original document, which was, apparently, the signal that she no longer existed. She left. In the elevator on the way down, she pressed the button for the lobby, faced the mirrored doors, and said quietly to her own reflection, "Girl, what is happening?" Her reflection did not answer, but it did look a little flushed. She learned the full picture gradually, the way you learn something dangerous, in pieces, from different people, each piece arriving with a slightly concerned expression. Ji Young, the front desk supervisor, told her during a lunch break that Mr. Shin had taken over the hotel group from his father at 22, after his father's health had declined sharply. The concierge, Mr. Beck, who was 60 years old and had worked at the hotel for 30 of those years, told her during an elevator ride that Mr. Shin had certain business associations outside the hotel that it was better not to ask about. And then Nara, the events coordinator who had become Michelle's desk neighbor and, after 1 week, her closest friend in Seoul, sat her down over ramyeon and soju one Thursday evening and said simply, "Unni, you know who he is, right? Like, who he actually is?" Michelle set down her chopsticks. "Tell me." Nara leaned in. "Shin Hyun-woo is the head of the Shin organization. They call him Jomunbyol, the Black Star." She paused for effect. "The hotels are legitimate, very legitimate, beautiful even. But the organization behind them, it controls half the night districts in Seoul, significant port operations in Busan, and there are people in very high places who answer to him." Michelle picked her chopsticks back up and resumed eating. Nara stared at her. "You're not scared?" "Nara," Michelle said, loading her chopsticks with noodles. "I grew up in Atlanta. I have met dangerous men before. Also, he pays on time and the health insurance is excellent." Nara looked at her for a long moment and then burst out laughing so hard she inhaled soju and had to be patted firmly on the back. But Michelle thought about it that night, alone in her small apartment in Mapo, the Han River visible from her window in a silver strip. She thought about the man behind the desk, the scar, the stillness, the way he had said 20 minutes, like it was a grace he was granting her. She was not here for this, she reminded herself. She was not here for complicated men with empire-level problems and eyes like deep water. She was here to heal, to breathe, to prove to herself and to the ghost of Marcus and his beach text that she was fine, that she could build something on her own, that her heart, though badly handled, still worked. She was here to work. That was all. That was absolutely all. The next 3 weeks passed in a rhythm. Michelle was good at her job in the way that competent people are quietly good at things, not with fanfare but with consistency, with the small, reliable excellence that makes an organization run smoothly without anyone quite understanding why. She rearranged the check-in workflow and cut guest processing time by 4 minutes. She redesigned the welcome package for international guests to include Korean phrasebooks with handwritten notes, because she noticed the non-Korean guests always looked slightly overwhelmed at the airport pickup. She caught a double booking error in the conference suite calendar that would have been a disaster on the day, and she fixed it without telling anyone except the relevant parties, because she wasn't interested in credit. She was interested in things working. Shin Hyun-woo noticed all of this. He didn't say so. He had a habit of reading the daily operations report in his office between 7 and 8 in the morning, and Michelle's name appeared in it more frequently than any other staff members, usually attached to a resolved problem or an improved metric. He read these entries. He set the report down. He thought, briefly and against his own preferences, about the woman who knocked twice. They crossed paths in the building regularly because Michelle was everywhere the building needed her to be, and because Shin Hyun-woo had a habit of appearing in unexpected places with the quiet, contained energy of someone who was always checking things, always watching. They exchanged professional nods, brief words about operational matters. He remained cool, direct, efficient. She remained professional, warm, and slightly guarded in the specific way of a person who had learned that warmth could be weaponized. Then came the incident with the vase. It was a Wednesday evening. A guest on the 14th floor, a very wealthy, very drunk man from somewhere in Europe, had become agitated about something involving his reservation and had, in the process of expressing this agitation, broken a decorative vase in the corridor. It was not a small vase. It was a 200-year-old Joseon-era Celadon vase that had been on loan from a private collector and was essentially priceless, and it was now in 11 pieces on the 14th floor carpet. Michelle was the on-call coordinator for the evening. She arrived on the floor to find the guest still agitated, 2 security guards in standoff position, and Shin Hyun-woo, who had apparently been in the building for a late meeting, standing in the corridor, perfectly still, watching the scene with an expression that was absolutely terrifying in its calmness. Michelle walked between him and the guest, gently and firmly redirected the guest toward the elevator with promises of a room upgrade and an apology she had no personal investment in, but delivered with complete sincerity. Got the man downstairs and into the capable hands of the front desk team, and then came back upstairs. Shin Hyun-woo was crouched on the floor. He was picking up the pieces of the vase, one by one, very carefully, with his bare hands. Michelle stood at a respectful distance and watched him do this. His face was still doing the terrifying calm thing, but his hands were careful with the broken pieces in a way that told her something she wouldn't have guessed about him. He was picking them up like they mattered, like he felt responsible for them being broken, even though he hadn't broken them. She went to the housekeeping closet at the end of the corridor, found a collection tray with a soft cloth lining, and brought it back. She set it down beside him without a word. He looked at it. Then he looked at her. Then he placed the piece he was holding into the tray gently. They gathered the rest of the pieces together in silence. When they were done, he stood. He looked at the tray. He said, "My grandmother gave that piece to the collection. She said it had survived 3 centuries and it would outlast us all." He paused. She was almost right. Michelle looked at the fragments in the tray. She said, "There's a Japanese art form, kintsugi. They repair broken things with gold. The idea is that the breakage is part of the history, not something to hide." She paused. "I don't know if that applies to Celadon, but the piece could still exist, just differently." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, not quite looking at her, "You handled that man well." "He was scared," she said, "drunk and in a foreign country, and things weren't going the way he expected. People break things when they're scared." Shin Hyun-woo looked at her then, with that same deep-water stillness, but this time there was something different in it, something that was paying attention in a new way. "People break things when they're scared," he repeated, quietly, as though he was filing it somewhere. Then he picked up the tray and walked away. Michelle stood in the empty corridor for a moment. The carpet where the vase had been was slightly dusty. She brushed her hands together and said to the empty hallway, very quietly, "Michelle Carter, you are here to work. Only to work. Do you understand yourself?" The hallway said nothing. It was not encouraging. Nara thought the whole situation was the funniest thing that had ever happened in the history of human events. "He picked up the pieces," she said the next morning over coffee, eyes wide, "with his hands, and you brought him a tray." "It was a practical decision," Michelle said. "And then you talked about Japanese pottery." "It was relevant." "Ani." Nara put both hands on the table. "In 3 years of working here, I have never seen that man have a conversation that wasn't about business. I have never seen him crouch on the floor. I have never seen him touch anything carefully. He is not a careful touch kind of man. He is a, I will restructure your entire life with a single phone call kind of man." "People are more than their reputations," Michelle said. Nara stared at her. "You like him." "I respect him as an employer." "You like him." Nara. Oh, this is so good. This is the best thing. Okay, listen. I need you to understand something about Shin Hyun-woo. Nara lowered her voice and leaned in. "People have been trying to get close to that man for years. Business people, society women, people who want his connections, people who want his money, his protection. There was a whole situation 2 years ago with a woman who turned out to be a plant from a rival organization, pretending to be interested in him to extract information. Since then," she drew a finger across her throat, "he trusts nobody. He lets nobody in. His second-in-command, Kang Tae-oh, who has been with him since they were teenagers, even he will tell you that Hyun-woo is the loneliest man in Seoul." She picked up her coffee cup. "And then you walked in and picked up pottery with him." Michelle was quiet for a moment. "I'm not trying to get close to him," she said. "I'm trying to do my job." "I know," Nara said, and her voice was gentler now. But sometimes, doing your job means you're exactly where someone needs you to be. Michelle looked out the cafe window. Seoul moved past in its usual beautiful, overwhelming way. People and light, and the smell of street food, and the sound of the city that never fully slept. I got my heart broken, she said, to the window more than to Nara. Really broken. And I promised myself I came here to fix me, not to find someone new to break me again. Nara nodded. She didn't push. That was one of the things Michelle had come to love about her. She knew when to stop. They sat together and drank their coffee and watched Seoul happen outside. And Michelle did not think about dark, still eyes or hands that were careful with broken things. She tried very hard not to think about those things. She failed moderately. The charity gala was a mistake from the beginning, and Michelle knew it, and she went anyway because her job required it. The Shin Imperial collection hosted an annual fundraiser for a children's arts foundation, and as the events coordinator, Michelle's presence was not optional. She wore a floor-length gown she had found in a boutique in Insadong, deep burgundy silk with a neckline that her cousin Diane, 3,000 miles away in Atlanta, would have approved of loudly and at length. Her locks were up in an elaborate crown style. Her jewelry was simple. She looked, by any reasonable measure, extraordinary. And she was aware of this in the detached, practical way she approached most things. Not vanity, just inventory. She arrived early, as she always did for events she was coordinating, checked the catering setup, confirmed the sound levels, made sure the auction items were displayed correctly, spoke to the foundation director, a warm woman in her 50s named Dr. Park, who kept taking her hands and saying, "You understand how these things should feel, not just how they should look. It's rare." By the time the guests arrived, Michelle was in event mode, present everywhere, visible nowhere, the invisible architecture that made the evening function. She moved through the room with the focused ease of someone who was managing 11 things simultaneously and making it look like she was doing nothing at all. She didn't notice Shin Hyun-woo watching her until much later. He was standing near the far wall with Kang Tae-oh, his second in command, a broad-shouldered man with an easy smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Kang Tae-oh was saying something. Shin Hyun-woo was not responding. He was watching Michelle work. Not the way a man watches a woman he finds attractive, though that was in there too, layered underneath. He was watching her the way you watch something you didn't expect, with the quiet shock of the genuinely surprised. Kang Tae-oh noticed where his boss's gaze had landed and said, in Korean, Hyung, you've been staring at the same corner of the room for 12 minutes. She reorganized the guest arrival sequence, Shin Hyun-woo said, in Korean, not shifting his gaze. Everyone is moving through the room differently. See how there's no clustering at the entrance? She adjusted the ambient lighting on the left side to draw people further in. She changed the placement of the first catering station. Kang Tae-oh looked at the room, looked at Michelle, looked back at his boss. You notice the lighting change. I notice everything. Right. Tae-oh took a sip of his drink. She's very pretty, Hyung. Shin Hyun-woo finally shifted his gaze. He looked at Tae-oh with an expression that could have cracked stone. Tae-oh smiled with his whole face. I'm just saying, you noticed the lighting. The moment of the evening that Michelle would replay in her mind later, at home, alone, lying on her bed in the dark, staring at the ceiling in a way that she refused to pathologize, happened near the end of the night. The silent auction had closed, the speeches were done, the room had shifted into the gentle, winding down energy of an event that had gone well. Michelle was standing near the courtyard door, checking her clipboard, calculating what still needed to happen before she could consider her night complete. You changed the lighting on the left side. his voice just behind her. She turned. He was closer than she expected, not invasively close, but close enough that she could see the silver of the scar in the warm event lighting. He had a glass of something in his hand, and he was looking at her with that expression he had, the one that was always calculating something, but tonight had something else underneath it that she didn't have a name for yet. "The right side of the room has the bar and the main catering," she said, recovering her composure efficiently. In the original setup, everything was pulling guests to the right, which means the auction items on the left got less attention. The foundation's highest value pieces were on the left. I warmed the lighting 2 degrees and repositioned the sashimi station. It increased left side foot traffic by roughly 40%. She paused. "Based on my observation." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "The auction raised 30% more than last year." She allowed herself a small private satisfaction. "Good." "You didn't tell anyone you changed it." It was a small operational adjustment. It didn't need a committee. He looked at her for a moment in that way he had, the deep water look, and then he said something she wasn't expecting. "Why hospitality?" She blinked. "Sorry?" "You're clearly intelligent, strategic. You could be in many fields. Why this one?" She considered him. She considered whether to give a professional answer or a true one. She decided, for reasons she couldn't fully explain, to give the true one. "Because," she said, "when people are away from home, they're vulnerable in a way they don't admit. They're tired. They're in a strange place. They need someone to make the environment feel safe and right without them having to ask. I like being that person. I like being the reason someone's experience goes well when they're far from everything they know." She paused. "Also, I'm very organized and I like telling catering teams what to do." He made a sound. It was very small. It lasted less than a second. But it was, and Michelle would stake her professional career on this, it was a laugh. The tiniest, most reluctant, most surprised laugh, as though it had escaped him before he could stop it, and his face looked momentarily startled by the fact of its own expression. It was gone almost instantly. His face closed back around it like water closing over a stone. But it had been there. Michelle felt something happen in her chest, something small and warm and inconveniently located and deeply, deeply problematic. She looked back at her clipboard. "I should check on the breakdown crew," she said in her most professional voice. "Yes," he said. His voice was slightly different, slightly less level. She walked away. She was very composed about it. She did not speed up. She kept her shoulders relaxed and her stride even. In the catering prep room, she found an empty corner, pressed her back against the wall, looked up at the fluorescent ceiling and said, very quietly, with great feeling, "Diane, I am going to kill you." Things changed after the gala. Not dramatically, not loudly. The way seasons change, gradually and then suddenly, the way you don't notice the temperature dropping until you realize you've been cold for a while. Shin Hyun-woo began requesting Michelle specifically for projects. Not always, not in a way that created obvious talk, but consistently. Planning sessions for major events, operational reviews where her read on guest experience was, he said, useful. She sat in rooms with him and his team and did her job, precisely and well, and she noticed things about him that she was trying very hard not to notice. He was fair, ruthlessly fair. He didn't ask anything of his staff that he didn't expect of himself. She watched him override his own preferences to give credit where credit was due, watched him dress down one of his senior managers in private rather than in public over a guest complaint, watched him sit with the caretaker of the building, an elderly man named Mr. O, for 15 minutes one morning, just sitting on the loading dock steps, not talking about business, just sitting. She noticed he hadn't smiled, not once, not really. The almost laugh at the gala was the closest, and even that had been snatched back. She asked Nara about it one evening. Nara was quiet for a moment. People say it's been a long time since he smiled, since before his father got sick, before he had to become who he is. She stirred her ramyeon. Teo told me once, I'm not supposed to know this, but you know how I am. Teo said that Hyun-woo used to be different. When he was younger, before everything landed on him, he used to be warmer. He used to laugh. She shook her head. But the organization, the responsibility, the betrayals, it weighs on you differently when you're young and not ready and people are relying on you for everything. He built a wall and called it a personality. Michelle sat with that for a while. She understood building a wall and calling it something else. She understood making hardness into a lifestyle because softness had cost you too much. She and this terrifying Korean crime boss had exactly one thing in common, and it was the specific loneliness of a person who had decided that the inside of them was not safe to show anyone. This was not a good thing to have in common with someone you were trying not to fall in love with. This was, in fact, exactly the wrong thing. The misunderstanding arrived on a Thursday, the way disasters usually did, unannounced and badly timed. Michelle was in the third-floor administrative office finishing a report when she heard two of the senior staff talking in the corridor. She wasn't eavesdropping. She simply hadn't made her presence known, and they hadn't noticed her through the half-open door. One of them, a man named Director Cho, who had been at the hotel since before Hyun-woo took over, and who had always looked at Michelle with a particular category of dismissive skepticism, was saying, in Korean, that he didn't know Michelle had spent 3 months of evenings studying. She's clever, I'll give her that. Strategic. But think about it. An American woman, specifically placed in this hotel, specifically useful to him, getting closer every week? It's the same play as before. The other person, whose voice she didn't recognize, said, "You think she's positioned?" "I think it's possible," Director Cho said. "I think he's too distracted to see it. She makes him, I don't know, different. And that's dangerous. Either she's playing him or she's going to become a weakness. Either way, she shouldn't be here." They moved away down the corridor. Michelle sat very still at the desk for a long moment. She was not. She had never been. She had no connection to any rival organization, no agenda, no play. She was a woman from Atlanta who had come to Seoul because her cousin was aggressive about her well-being. That was the entire story. And now she was being compared to a spy who had once tried to destroy the man she was, the man she respected, the man she... She closed her laptop. She stood up. She went home. She did not sleep well. The next morning, she requested a meeting with Shin Hyun-woo through the formal scheduling system. She had always had access to his schedule for operational reasons. This was different. His assistant confirmed the meeting for 9 a.m. At 9 a.m., she walked into his office, sat down across from his desk without being invited to sit, and placed her professional portfolio on the table. He looked at her. Something in her bearing had registered with him. She could tell. He was reading her the way he read everything, quickly and completely. "I want to be transparent with you," she said, "about who I am, because I think it's relevant." He set down his pen. She told him everything. Marcus, the account, the beach text, Diane's ambush, why she was in Seoul, not strategy, not positioning, not anyone else's agenda. Just a woman running from a broken heart, landing in his hotel, trying to do good work and heal quietly. She told him about her family in Atlanta, her mother, who was a high school music teacher, her father, who had died when she was 11, and whose record collection she had memorized by age 12. She told him what she had overheard. She told him she understood if it raised concerns, and that she would resign if he believed, even partially, that her presence was a risk to him or the organization. When she finished, there was a silence that was long enough to be its own statement. Then he said, "Director Cho will be reassigned to our Busan property by the end of the week." She blinked. That's not the point I was making." "I know what point you were making." He looked at her steadily. "I'm aware of who you are, Michelle. I have been from the beginning." He held up a hand before she could respond to that. "Not surveillance, due diligence. Everyone who comes into my building undergoes background review. Yours showed exactly what you described. A woman who builds things carefully, who was hurt by someone who didn't deserve her, and who came here to put herself back together." He paused. "I've known there was no agenda. I've known you were real." She was very quiet for a moment. "Then why are we... why has everything been so..." "Because knowing someone is real," he said, and his voice was doing something it hadn't done before, something careful and effortful, "is not the same as knowing what to do about them." The room was very still. Michelle looked at him. He was not doing the terrifying calm thing right now. He was doing something she hadn't seen him do before, something that looked, on him, almost like exposure, like a wall with a crack in it, standing very carefully. "나도 몰라요," she said quietly. "I don't know either." Her Korean was still beginner level, but she'd been practicing. She realized now, partly because she'd wanted to understand him in his own language. His eyes changed. Something moved in them, deep and surprised and warm. "Your Korean is terrible," he said. "I've been here 4 months," she said. "It's still terrible." "You understood me, though." "Yes," he said. "I understood you." Kang Tae-oh had a theory, which he shared with Nara over what had become their own secret friendship, born out of proximity and mutual entertainment at the unfolding situation. He's falling. He doesn't know how to fall. He's never done it before. He keeps trying to stand up while falling. It's the funniest and also saddest thing I've ever seen. Nara relayed this to Michelle. Michelle threw a pillow at her. "Stop talking to his second-in-command about me." "I can't. It's too interesting. Also, Tae-oh is very charming." Michelle looked at her. "Nara." Nara smiled serenely. "Anyway, what I'm saying is, he likes you. And you like him. And you're both moving at the speed of glaciers for reasons that are emotionally understandable, but logistically frustrating." "He is a crime boss," Michelle said. "Yes. Who runs half of Seoul's Underworld. Allegedly. Also, the hotels are genuinely beautiful. My mother would lose her entire mind." "Mothers always come around," Nara said confidently, with the confidence of someone whose own mother had come around to considerably stranger situations. Michelle lay back on Nara's couch and stared at the ceiling. "I didn't come here to fall for anyone," she said, for what felt like the 400th time. "I know," Nara said, softer now. "But maybe falling wasn't the wrong thing to do here. Maybe you got here exactly when you were supposed to." Michelle stared at the ceiling for a long moment. Then she said, "His laugh. That tiny, surprised laugh at the gala. He doesn't know how to laugh anymore, Nara. And I almost made him do it accidentally. What do you do with that?" Nara looked at her with the expression of someone watching a film whose ending they already know. "You make him do it on purpose," she said. "That's what you do." She brought him food. This was, she would later acknowledge, a significant tactical escalation that she had not fully thought through. It happened on a night when she was working late on an event brief, and she ordered delivery from a Jollof rice and chicken spot she'd found in Itaewon, run by a Ghanaian Korean woman named Abena, who had become one of Michelle's favorite people in the city. Michelle always ordered too much. Always. It was an Atlanta habit. You ordered enough for the ancestors. She had extra. His office light was still on. She could see it from the corridor. Without quite making the decision, she went to his door and knocked. Twice. Troa! She opened the door. He was at his desk, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, surrounded by documents. He looked up. He looked at the container in her hands. "I ordered too much," she said, in the tone of someone presenting a reasonable and completely non-meaningful explanation. He looked at the container. He looked at her. "What is it?" "Jollof rice. West African. The place is in Itaewon. A woman named Abena runs it. You should try it. You don't have to. But you've been in here since 7 and it's now past 10 and I thought..." She stopped herself. She had been rambling. Michelle Carter did not ramble. She had given rambling up at age 25 as a personal development measure. Shin Hyun-woo stood up from his desk, walked over to her, took the container. His fingers briefly overlapped with hers in the handoff, and neither of them acknowledged this. He opened the container. The smell of Abena's jollof, smoky, complex, richly spiced, filled the office. He looked at it for a moment with the focused consideration he gave everything. "먹어봐도 돼요? May I try it?" "That's why I brought it," she said. He tried it. She watched him try it with a concentration she was directing away from his face and toward the middle distance, somewhat unsuccessfully. He chewed. He was quiet. Then he looked at the container with an expression that was the most unguarded she had ever seen on him. Something purely sensory, surprised by pleasure. "이게 뭐야?" he said softly. "What is this?" Not a question, an exclamation swallowed mid-sentence, quiet and involuntary. "Right?" Michelle said. He looked at her then, standing in his office doorway with the warm light behind her and the smugness of a woman who has introduced someone to a genuinely great restaurant, and the crack in his wall opened a little wider. "Sit down," he said. "There's too much for one person." "There is," she agreed, already pulling the chair. They ate Abena's jollof rice in his office at 10 o'clock at night, surrounded by organized stacks of documents that represented everything he carried, with Seoul visible through the floor-length window behind him, and Michelle told him about Abena, how she had come to Korea for love and stayed for the food scene, how she had married a Korean chef and they ran the restaurant together, how she mixed her grandmother's recipes with Korean spice profiles in ways that shouldn't have worked, but completely did. Hyun-woo listened in the way he listened, completely, without interruption, storing everything. Then he said, "My mother was a good cook." The past tense was quiet and deliberate, and Michelle heard it fully. "Tell me about her," she said. And he did. Slowly and carefully, like pulling something valuable out of a place that had been kept for a long time, he told her about his mother, who had died when he was 16, who had made doenjang jjigae on Sunday mornings and had a habit of singing off-key to trot music, and had called him Pyeol, star, not because he was exceptional, but because she said he was the only fixed point in her sky. Michelle listened. She didn't fill the silences. She didn't rush to offer comfort. She just held space for what he was saying with the complete attention of someone who understood what it meant to tell someone something you'd been keeping. When he finished, there was a silence. "She'd have liked that rice," he said finally, gesturing at the container. "I think so too," Michelle said. He looked at her, really looked, in a way he had been incrementally doing more of, building towards something, and he said, 당신은 왜 이렇게 쉬워요? Why are you so easy? A Korean idiom meaning, why is it so easy to be with you? Why does this come naturally? Michelle's Korean was still technically terrible. She got it anyway. She looked at the window, at Seoul. My dad used to say that some people are just the right frequency for each other, like radio stations. You can spend your whole life scanning through static, and then one day you just land on something clear. He was quiet for a very long time. Then, I have not laughed, he said slowly, since my father became ill, since I became this. That night at the gala, when you said you were organized and liked telling catering teams what to do, he paused. Something almost happened. In here. He placed one hand briefly against his chest, lightly, and she had never seen him do anything even remotely like this gesture. Michelle looked at his hand against his chest. Her eyes went warm. I know, she said. I saw. I thought I'd forgotten how, he said. You haven't, she said. It just needs somewhere safe to go. He looked at her. The wall, the careful, decades-built, battle-tested wall, had a person-shaped gap in it now, and they both knew it, and neither of them pretended otherwise. Michelle, he said, and the way he said her name, with that precise accent and the weight of someone who didn't use names carelessly, she felt it from her crown to her heels. I know, she said softly. I don't know how to do this. Neither do I. I'm also still scared. I'm not scared, he said. She raised an eyebrow. I'm terrified, he corrected, with a flatness that was so unexpectedly honest that she laughed. A real, warm, full laugh that bounced off his office walls and disappeared into Seoul. And Shin Hyun-woo, the Black Star, the head of the Shin organization, the man who controlled port operations and night districts, and whom powerful people feared and no one had heard laugh in years, looked at her laughing in the warm light of his office, and something in his face came apart at the seams, quietly and completely, and for the first time in a very, very long time, he smiled. It was slow, like a door opening that had been shut for winter, like the first light of something after a long dark. It was a small smile, private and unpolished, not the kind that was made for rooms or photographs, but the kind that happens when a person forgets to protect themselves. Michelle saw it. Her own laughter quieted. They looked at each other in the aftermath of it. 그거야, she said, very softly. There it is. He looked slightly dazed, like a man who had just found something he'd lost so long ago he'd stopped believing it existed. That's the first time, he said, and his voice was different. Not careful now, not controlled, just honest, that I've smiled because I wanted to. I know, she said. You didn't know that when you came here. No, she said. I didn't know anything when I came here except that I was broken and Diane was going to hear about it. Who is Diane again? My cousin. She's the reason I'm in Seoul. She's going to be insufferably smug about all of this. He looked at her. I'd like to meet her. Michelle blinked. If she's the reason you're here, he said simply, I owe her something. Michelle looked at this man, this scarred, guarded, empire-carrying, finally smiling man, and felt her heart do the thing she'd specifically told it not to do, the thing she'd come to Seoul to prevent, the warm, terrifying, completely involuntary freefall of loving someone. "You're going to make this very complicated," she told him. "Yes," he agreed. "My life was simple before this." Was it? She thought about Marcus, about Jasmine, about cereal for dinner and sad movies and a heart that had been left in pieces on the floor like an antique vase. "No," she admitted. "It was lonely." "Mine too," he said. They sat in his office until midnight, and then past midnight, talking about things that had nothing to do with the hotel and everything to do with being human, about music and memory and the weight of other people's expectations and what it means to build something from scratch when someone else's damage is your starting point. She told him about her father's record collection. He told her about a summer when he was 14, when his mother was still alive, and he'd wanted to be an architect, had drawn building blueprints in his notebooks, had believed the world was something you could design. "You still could," she said. "I build other things now," he said. "That doesn't mean the boy who drew blueprints stopped existing," she said. "He's just in here, somewhere." She gestured vaguely at him, broadly, at all of him. He looked at her for a long moment. "You're a bad influence." "I've never been called that before," she said. "I meant it as a compliment." "That's the most you thing you've ever said to me." He almost smiled again, the ghost of it. She counted it. From here, the story would continue into its final arc. The rival organization's threat that puts Michelle in danger, Hyun-woo's impossible choice between the world that made him and the person who reminded him who he was. The moment Kang Tae-oh calls Michelle at 2 a.m. and says simply, "He needs you to trust him right now." And she does. And the moment in the rain outside the hotel when Hyun-woo, coat-soaked, having just made the choice, comes back to her not with words, but with his hand open at his side, offered, waiting. And she takes it. And the moment, weeks later, when Diane video calls from Atlanta and gets one look at Michelle's face and screams loud enough to wake the building. And Michelle says, "Don't." And Diane says, "Girl!" And Michelle says, "I know." And Diane says, "Is he fine, though? Like, face-wise? Send a picture. Send it right now. Michelle Renee Carter, if you don't send..." And Hyun-woo, appearing in frame behind Michelle, raises an eyebrow and says, in perfect English, "You must be Diane." "Thank you." And Diane actually screams. And that's where we leave them. Michelle Carter, who came to Seoul broken, who came here to hide, who came here with a bruised heart and a clipboard and absolutely no plan, and Shin Hyun-woo, who had the whole city in his hands and was still lonely in every room he walked into until she knocked twice on his door. She didn't come for his money. She didn't come for his power. She came to do her job and eat jollof rice and survive. But what she gave him, without trying, without strategy, without even meaning to, was the one thing all that empire couldn't buy. She gave him somewhere safe to be real. And he smiled, for the first time in years, in her direction, because of her. And reader, I want you in the comments right now because I need to know, did you see that smile coming? Because I feel like the jollof rice was the turning point, and I stand by that. Drop your thoughts below. Tell me which scene got you. Tell me if Diane is the real MVP of this story, because she absolutely might be. If you are new here, hello, welcome, you have excellent taste. This channel is your home if you love stories where love is hard-won and worth it, where the romance hits different because both people have scars, where the K-drama energy meets Afro-Korean heart, and nobody is here to play. Subscribe, ring the bell, share this with someone who needs a love story today. Someone who's been eating cereal alone for 6 months. Someone whose heart got handled badly. Someone who came here just to work and stayed for something bigger. This one is for them. And for Diane. Honestly, pour one out for Diane. She started everything.